as you saw, Mexico or corn is very, very important to their diet. I think a key thing here to realize is it's white corn. It's not number 2 yellow corn, which a lot of the program was about. Number 2 yellow corn is actually a corn that goes into cattle feed. And so most of the imports that Mexico gets from the U.S. are pretty much yellow corn, number 2 yellow. The white corn that's used for food purposes is not genetically modified. They do import a little bit from the U.S., but they're essentially self-sufficient right now. I mean, they produce about 95% of their internal needs for white corn. The real question on genetically engineered corn is on the number 2 yellow, which essentially goes for livestock feed.
So why is the Mexican government doing this? If this is not about the diet of Mexicans or the crop that they consume, but as you said about livestock, what is this? Is this about national pride?
Well, it's a little unclear too, because the way the directive reads is it bans the import of any genetically modified grain that is going for human consumption. So the question that everyone is asking and trying to get more details on is, does that include grain that is then fed to livestock, which then is obviously consumed by people? But right now, the white corn that the U.S. is shipping to Mexico is limited in quantity and is not genetically modified. So yeah, I mean, I think that some of this is obviously self-sufficiency resonates with a lot of people. Again, for white corn, I think Mexico is essentially self-sufficient. They aren't self-sufficient in number 2 yellow corn, however, for cattle feed. And in fact, if you remember back in 2007, 8, and I think even in 2010, 11, when we had these big price spikes in commodities, a lot of that driven by biofuel production in the U.S., the problem was that a lot of the corn was being diverted from export markets and being consumed by ethanol in the U.S. And as a consequence, prices of corn went up and the price of cattle feed went up. And what happened in Mexico is cattle producers started feeding number 2, instead of number 2 yellow corn, they started feeding white corn, which then drove up the price of tortillas. So it's a very complicated relationship. But essentially, number 2 yellow corn, I think the important thing to remember is that doesn't go for consumption per se. It goes indirectly into cattle feed.
I want to draw a bigger picture here and really connect the dots about something that I've experienced when working in Mexico as a journalist as well, but NAFTA, Mexico corn, drug cartels, and immigration. So in the 90s, NAFTA really did some damage to Mexican corn growers in the south of the country, many of them losing their incomes, moving to work closer in the border areas in U.S. factories that set up shop there. Then the cartels sort of swooping in and finding these people. I visited some morgues there where there was an overflow of John Does, and what they told me was these are people who used to farm in the South.
Yeah.
Is this part of a bigger picture for Mexico and geopolitics?
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right about the problem with there's a lot of smallhold farmers in the South, and when Mexico borders were globalized, what you saw is, Mexico, for example, now is a large net exporter to the U.S. in terms of agricultural products. Those are largely coming from fruit and vegetable sectors. The smaller farms, what was promised to them at the time was that they would be supported through income supports, through the so-called Pro Campo program that had been instituted at the time. That never really delivered in terms of income. And as a consequence, a lot of farms just couldn't make it as subsistence farms. And I think that's a bigger thing than NAFTA. I mean, it really is a globalization issue. And of course, you see those things even within the U.S. with smaller farms trying to be profitable. Yes, go ahead.
I have to ask, because also American corn growers, farmers are heavily subsidized. Can the Mexican growers ever compete with that? We hear criticisms of anti-socialism, that it's on the left, but that's a long-standing subsidization from the central government. Is it fair?
Well, if you're asking me, are subsidies a good idea? I'd say no. I mean, they're very expensive. They're inefficient. I think the way a lot of the programs in the U.S. work now, they do less to distort production, but they do distort land values, and certainly at some level keep farmers on the farm who maybe might not be farming otherwise. There's no question, if you look at the developed economies, they're like the EU or the US, and now some of the large developing countries like China, and to a lesser extent India, but other countries, provide subsidies to their farmers. I think the world would be a lot better off if all the subsidies were eliminated.
Joseph Glauber.